The clash of steel, the thunder of cannons, and the roar of men charging into the abyss of chaos has always defined the battlefield. Throughout history, warriors have risen who seemed untouchable, their will unbroken even when the odds stood against them. They were men who marched not just with weapons in hand, but with unshakable courage burning in their souls. These warriors carved their names into the soil of history, not with ink, but with blood, fire, and iron. On the plains where empires collided, the Spartans stood unyielding at Thermopylae. Surrounded, outnumbered, and facing certain death, they did not falter. Their shields locked, their spears thrust forward, and their resolve held like an unbreakable wall. Though crushed under waves of Persian might, their sacrifice turned defeat into eternal legend. Amida. To this day, their final stand echoes as a testament to men who refused to surrender. Across the frozen steppes, Mongol horsemen swept like a storm, striking with speed and precision unmatched by any foe. They moved like shadows across the land, appearing where the enemy least expected. Under the command of Genghis Khan, they dismantled kingdoms, shattered armies, and instilled fear in empires thought invincible. They were not just warriors, they were a force of nature, relentless and unstoppable. On distant fields centuries later, Napoleon's soldiers marched with drums beating and banners raised high. They fought through smoke and fire, holding the line against cannons that ripped the earth apart beneath them. Time and again, they advanced through mud, through rain, through endless fire, driven by a leader whose vision burned as fiercely as their courage. Even in defeat, their spirit became the story of an age where glory and ruin walked hand in hand. In the jungles of Vietnam, soldiers moved silently under the canopy, every shadow a threat, every rustle a whisper of death. They endured endless rain, exhaustion, and unseen enemies striking from the darkness. Yet through the chaos of guerrilla warfare, through ambush and fire, they pressed on with grit that defied despair. It was not just weapons that carried them forward, but the iron of endurance that refused to break. From the medieval knights whose armor clashed in brutal duels, to the samurai whose code of honor bound them to fight until the last breath, history remembers those who stood when others fell. Well, their stories are not merely of war, but of unyielding spirit, of men who embraced the storm and became legends because of it. War is unforgiving, but it is in the furnace of battle that these warriors prove themselves eternal. They were not invincible in body, for every warrior can bleed. They were unstoppable in will, for no force could bend their resolve. The battlefield may take lives, but it also forges legends, and these warriors remain carved into time as symbols of courage that even death could not silence. The spirit of unstoppable warriors lies not in their weapons, but in their unyielding resolve to fight against impossible odds, turning sacrifice into legend. To understand this spirit, one must step onto the battlefield where fear hangs in the air like smoke, where the clash of armies is not just a contest of strength, but a test of will. Weapons may break, armor may shatter, and bodies may fall, but what defines these warriors is the resolve that refuses to yield. It is the fire within their hearts that turns them from ordinary men into figures that echo through the corridors of history. Take the Spartans at Thermopylae, a handful of soldiers facing a vast Persian army. Outnumbered beyond reason, they stood their ground not because they thought they would live, but because they believed their sacrifice would inspire. Their spears broke, their shields splintered, but still they fought, shoulder to shoulder, until the last man fell. What made their story eternal was not victory, for they were overwhelmed, but their refusal to bow to the weight of inevitability. In that moment, their resolve outshone the might of an empire, proving that true strength is measured not by numbers, but by spirit. Centuries later, the Mongol horsemen under Genghis Khan showed another face of this same resolve. They swept across continents, facing kingdoms larger and richer than their own, yet no enemy could break them. Their weapons were swift, their strategies sharp, but above all, their will to conquer and endure drove them forward. In freezing winters and burning deserts, they pressed on without hesitation. It was not steel alone that carried them through, but the relentless determination to overcome every obstacle. Their spirit was as vast and unstoppable as the lands they claimed, and it was this inner fire that made them legends feared and remembered. Indianly, even in times when defeat seemed inevitable, warriors have shown that the human spirit can turn the darkest hour into immortality. Consider the soldiers who stood firm during sieges, starving within walls, yet refusing to surrender. With every passing day, they fought not only the enemy outside, but also hunger, disease, and despair within. Their weapons grew fewer, their strength faded, but still they endured. Their sacrifice became a story not of loss, but of defiance against the impossible. To fall with unbroken will is to win a victory that no conqueror can erase. The weapons of these warriors are long gone, rusted and buried beneath the earth. The battlefields where they fought are silent now, covered in grass and forgotten by time. Yet their stories live because they embody something greater than victory, the courage to resist when surrender seems the only option. Their spirit shows that true power is not in the blade of a sword or the barrel of a gun, but in the decision to keep fighting, even when the end is certain. In every age, from the armor-clad knights of medieval Europe to the disciplined samurai of Japan, warriors carried this spirit into battle. The knight who rode into hopeless odds to protect his people, the samurai who chose death over dishonor, the soldier in modern wars who stood fast while the world crumbled around him, all are bound by the same unyielding resolve. Their weapons were tools, but their legacy was forged by willpower. It is this spirit that transforms sacrifice into legend. A man who falls in battle may die, but if he stands with unshakable courage, his story becomes eternal. The battlefield becomes not just a place of death, but a forge where legends are created, where the resolve of warriors turns fleeting moments into timeless memory. This is why history remembers them, not as men who wielded swords or guns, but as warriors who embodied the unstoppable fire of human resolve. Across centuries and continents, from Spartans to samurai, their courage and endurance forged stories that transformed the chaos of war into eternal memory. Saki, the world has always been divided by battlefields, yet in those same places, history was united by the legends of warriors who refuse to be forgotten. Their names differ, their lands and cultures stand apart, but what binds them together is the courage that endured beyond fear, the strength that outlived death, and the memory that time itself could not erase. The Spartans at Thermopylae remain one of the most enduring examples of this spirit. Facing the endless tide of the Persian army, their courage was not born from the thought of survival, but from the certainty of sacrifice. Their stand was a defiance written in blood, a final act that told the world some men would rather die than yield. Though crushed in body, their endurance reshaped the story of Greece and gave birth to a legend that still burns today. Thermopylae was not simply a battle, it was the transformation of chaos into memory, a moment where courage outshone destruction. Far from Greece, across the vast plains of Asia, the samurai of Japan carried a code that demanded absolute loyalty, discipline, and honor. Their courage was not only found in the heat of combat, but in the acceptance of death as a companion. To the samurai, endurance meant standing unbroken against fear, fighting with calm precision, even when defeat was certain. Their battles were brutal, their duels often fatal, but their legacy was eternal. They proved that courage was not just a moment on the battlefield, but a way of life that lived on long after the clash of swords had ended. The medieval knights of Europe carried their own banner of endurance. Clad in armor, weighed down by steel, they rode into battles where survival was a rare gift. Fought in wars of conquest and defense, their lances shattering on impact, their swords ringing. Many perished nameless, swallowed by the carnage of war, but their collective courage carved the foundation of stories told for centuries. Their endurance in the mud, the blood, and the fire of medieval battlefields created a memory of chivalry and sacrifice that still echoes in ballads and chronicles. In another age, Mongol warriors thundered across the steppes, striking fear into kingdoms thought invincible. They endured brutal marches across deserts, storms, and endless distances, moving with a resolve that shattered the defenses of empires. Their courage lay not only in their mastery of war, but in their unrelenting will to push further, to face what others would not dare. The Mongols transformed chaos into legend not just through conquest, but through the endurance that allowed them to move as one unstoppable tide. Centuries later, in the age of gunpowder and empire, soldiers of Napoleon marched across Europe with a courage that defied exhaustion. They endured endless campaigns from the frozen wastelands of Russia to the bloody fields of Waterloo. Their boots were worn, their rations scarce, yet they pressed on under banners of glory. Their courage was not always met with victory, but their endurance etched their names into history as men who carried their emperor's dream to the very ends of Europe. Even in defeat, their memory remains one of resilience and fire. The story of warriors does not end in ancient times. In modern wars, courage and endurance continued to shape history. Soldiers in the trenches of the First World War endured months of mud, fire, and gas, holding the line with nothing but willpower. In the jungles of Vietnam, men carried the weight of exhaustion and fear, yet still pushed forward into darkness. In each era, chaos surrounded them, but their courage gave meaning to the suffering, transforming horror into memory that future generations would carry. What unites Spartans, samurai, knights, Mongols, and modern soldiers is not their weapons, but their spirit. They fought in different lands, under different flags, yet all proved that courage can defy fear and endurance can overcome despair. In every clash, every charge, and every desperate stand, their stories broke free of the battlefield. They became lessons, warnings, and inspirations. War is chaos, but memory is order. Courage and endurance are the bridges that transform fleeting moments into eternal legends. The eternal legends. That is why history does not only remember the victors, it remembers those who stood unshaken in the storm. Across centuries and continents, their spirit endures, reminding us that the greatest weapon a warrior can carry is not forged of steel, but of will. In the end, every battlefield becomes silent, every weapon grows cold, and every empire fades into dust. Yet what remains are the stories of those who stood unyielding when the world demanded they fall. From the narrow pass of Thermopylae to the endless steppes of Asia, from the honor-bound samurai to the soldiers of modern wars, their courage and endurance turned fleeting battles into eternal legends. These warriors remind us that while death may claim the body, resolve and sacrifice carve a place in history that no time can erase. They were more than fighters. They were unstoppable spirits, forever bound to the memory of war.